Okay, guys, so in lesson 8.4, we're learning about absolute value. Please remember that in our last video, you learned from Khan Academy that absolute value is the distance from zero. So it's just a symbol. So what you need to be careful is that there's always two lines in between the number. Okay, so when we're writing it, we need to be careful it doesn't look like this, where it looks like 191. You need to make sure for on your side that maybe it's a little darker and it's a little bit below the number and a little bit above the number, so you really can tell that you're talking about the absolute value. And it really just means the distance from zero. So if I say absolute value of 9, your absolute value of 9 is 9, because where it is on the number line is 9 away from 0. If I said the absolute value of -9, well, absolute value -9 on the number line is exactly where from 0 is exactly the same as absolute value of 9. It's just on the other side. So the absolute value of 9 is 9, and the absolute value of -9 is 9. Okay, so when you're doing your number lines and you're comparing, the first thing you have to do is you need to solve your absolute values. And I'm going to say it with an X in there. All right, so you're actually just going to be making it positive. All right, so that's your little trick. So when you're finding your absolute value of 2, it's 2, and the absolute value of -5 is 5. So you're really just staying in the positive area for this one. So I am going to go by integers, and I'm going to go by your whole numbers. So this is going to be -1, this is -2, but technically I don't have to go into my negatives. So I'm just going to go straight, and I am going to skip just because I like how nice and neat it makes it look. And I am going to go to 5 because that's where my absolute value of 5 is, or an absolute value of -5, I'm sorry. So here's my 2. All right, and I'm going to put my 2 up here. And here's and the reason why I'm writing it up on top is because I need you to know that you always write it as the original. So even though this is 5, you're writing down that this is the absolute value of -5. So we're going to compare. So we're going to write 2, because we want to compare 2 first, to the absolute value of -5. So here's my 2, and we're going to ask that question, is it furthest to the left or furthest to the right? Well, it's furthest to the left, so that means it's the least. So that means we're going to say 2 is less than absolute value of -5. So here's our next question. We have absolute value of 3 and 5/10 and -1. All right, so let's solve it first. So the absolute value of 3 and 5/10 is just 3 and 5/10. And then -1 is just -1. Okay, we're not going to find, there's no absolute value sign, so we have to leave it as its integer. All right, so we are going to do our number line, and I'm going to go by wholes, and here's -1, -2, -3, -4, and then I'm going to do the same on this side. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so 3.5, or the absolute value of 3.5, is going to be here. And I'm going to write, I almost wrote negative, absolute value of 3.5. And then -1 is right here. So here's my -1. All right, so they start with the absolute value of 3.5. So always write it as its original. And we're comparing it to -1. So absolute value of 3.5 is first. So we're going to look here. And is it the furthest to the left or furthest to the right? It's furthest to the right. So I mean, it is the greatest. So we're going to say absolute value of 3.5 is greater than -1.